This is part 2 of the instrument panel on an Irwin 38 1986 center cockpit. Part 1 was the original panel, and I did show you this uncompleted or not completed. It is now finished, and we'll go through it a little bit so you can understand what was done. The tack, obviously we all know what it is. The oil, this is the engine temperature, oil pressure, and the amp meter. The amp meter that's going to be eventually installed in this, which will be as soon as I get it, purchase it online, is going to be 0 to 100 amps, not 0 to 60. And the reason being is that the alternator is not the original alternator. It's an aftermarket alternator that puts out about 100 amps. So I just stuck this in the hole just to fill it up, but it's going to be replaced with one. And the one that's going to be installed is going to have an external shunt, and I'll explain that. This one has an internal shunt, but I'll explain the reason why you really want an external shunt, not an internal shunt. And this is the alternator discharge light. I know I wasn't going to use any lights, but it was a little bit easier to install a light than it was put a resistor in place, where if you don't have a light, you have to have a resistor to the alternator. So I decided just to use the light. Even though I'm not going to be looking at it as much, it will show red when it's discharging, but the amp meter is really going to tell me the story of exactly what's going on. This doesn't tell you how much you're charging, it just tells you if you're discharging. This really tells you how much you're charging. This is a new key switch right now. I picked this up at an auto parts store. It's got all the positions you want, and it will do just fine. Since there's no glow plugs, I don't need a special switch for that reason. This switch works just fine. And this switch up here, which is a toggle switch, on-off toggle switch, and that's going to be for the compass light, since the power comes off of this panel for the compass. The way I have it wired up right now, I could have had a center off switch and had instrument lights for the down position, and then up position would be the compass lights. But I decided that the amount of current that this draws is very little, so when you turn the key on, the instrument panel lights come on and they stay on, and that's fine. During the daytime it doesn't make any difference. At nighttime is really when you want it, and when the engine's off you don't want to see these lights, so you're sailing, so you would use the compass light. So let's talk about, oh, and this is the alarm. I said I was going to mount the alarm in the back so you didn't see it, but I ended up having room. I thought I wouldn't have a good layout, but I ended up having room, so I decided to bring the alarm up front and not worry about the chain for the rudder, for the wheel to get in the way. So I mounted it up front, and I'm happy with that arrangement of mounting it up front. Let's talk about the back of the panel. The back of the panel is here as you see it, and I'll explain kind of what it is. It's a little bit, I know there's a lot of wires on here, but these are the original connectors from the engine harness. So I kept the original connectors, even though I rewired things differently here. There were 3 connectors. I did have one extra connector, and I'll explain this one in a second. And this is the 12 volts for the cigarette lighter jack on the side of the pedestal for if you were going to plug a searchlight in or something like that. And then this one here, this wire here, is for the compass light, and that goes up to the top of the pedestal so you can turn the compass light in. Let's talk about the switch. This is the switch that I picked up at an auto parts, and it's a standard ignition switch. It's off, accessory, start, or off, ignition, start, and then to the left it would be accessory. And that's fine since there's no glow plugs. This is the original Yamar switch. Now let's look at the difference in size. You can see that the original Yamar switch was huge compared to the newer switch, and I decided to go with the newer switch because it was smaller. I don't have glow plugs, I don't have a preheater, so I don't need the heavy contacts. This switch here does just fine. It gives me a little more room inside the panel, and also room inside the binnacle where the panel was mounted. So I eliminated this switch. It is a Yamar switch. The key says Yamar on it. That's not going to be used. That switch is going. try to make this as neat as possible. I wired everything in a harness, tie wrapped everything in, and it's pretty straightforward. Now, this extra connector I added because I like to do things with connectors. If you have to remove the panel, you can. You don't have to cut wires. This is really for really two things. The first thing it's for is for the shunt for the amp meter. And the reason you want an external shunt is it gives you the ability to run the lighter wires up to this panel, because the current that's running through the shunt is really the alternator current, which is 100 amps. And if I had to run wires up to this amp meter, if it was an internal shunted meter, I'd have to use very large gauge wires, and that would make it cumbersome to have number 6 gauge, or I have to look at the chart, but heavy gauge wire is 6. It even could be as low as 4 gauge to come up to this amp meter. So I didn't want to do that. So I ended up using an external shunt that gets mounted on the body alternator, and light wires. As you can see, these are the light wires that come up, and that carries the current for the meter, which is not a lot of current. It's in the range of milliamps. There's 4 wires here. The other 2 wires, so it's 2 for the shunt. The other 2 wires are going to be for the oil pressure gauges, the gauge and the temperature gauge. Since I got rid of the lights, but I still kept the alarm, which is a sounder alarm when you lose pressure or a temperature exceeds it. It activates an alarm, but it doesn't do anything for the actual reading. So these 2 extra wires that were added in this harness are actually for the gauges to really show you the actual values that are on the meter, on the 2 meters. So that's why there's 2 extra wires. But this is the panel. It came out fairly well. It came out nice and neat. And there's not much really to say about it, but it looks like it should be a nice, clean installation. It's a lot neater than the other one was. The other one was a little messy from just people, tying things off on it. They were, putting butt leads, crimping leads into the panel, and not doing a very neat job of it. One of the things I do want to talk about is a lot of these here, you notice they're all crimp lugs. These are spades and they're crimped. These red ones. What I try to do whenever I do anything on a boat, since there's always a lot of corrosion involved, is I crimp the terminals, the ring terminals, which is right here, and then I go in and I solder after I crimp it, I actually solder. I don't solder it in place, of course, but I solder the terminal to the wire before I put it on the lugs. And I know that some people say, well, you get the problem is some of the solder wicks up into the wire and causes a hard spot. But if done properly, it doesn't really wick up into the wire. If it does, it's very little, not any more than 1/8 of an inch. In the case of a power boat, it could potentially be an issue, but I haven't seen that happen yet. On a sailboat, it's certainly not an issue because you're not pounding and jumping across waves, so you don't have the vibration. I did this with my last boat. I did it, and that boat ran for 33 years with no problems, never had an electrical problem. And that boat got destroyed in Sandy, had nothing to do with the wiring, so that system seemed to work. Also, I am probably going to make another YouTube, and we're going to talk about wire. Most of the wire you purchase at West Marina, any of the stores, are usually just 2 conductors, and they're either black and white or red and black. And that becomes very difficult when you're wiring a harness like this, because you need multiple color wires. As you can see, we have different color wires with tracers in them. And I'm going to be talking just about wire in another video. I'll have different types of wires, bundles, wire bundles, and some of them are 10 conductor bundles with 10 different colors in it. And I'll talk about that so we can understand that a little bit better. But this is the panel. This will probably be installed in the next few days in the boat. One of the things I am going to do is, since I made a new panel, I am going to drill holes in a slightly different location than the original panel, because those holes were stripped in the fiberglass and the panel was not really attached very well because they were stripped. So the advantage is putting a new panel. I could just offset the holes a little bit, pick up new fiberglass, and that should really solve the loose screw problem that it had. So this is it. I did have a few questions on the last video. If you have any questions, just make comments, and I certainly will respond. And sometimes I actually respond with another YouTube video. And that's pretty much it. So any questions, fire away.